Number 3. The St. Catharines Poltergeist. St. Catharines is a city in the Niagara region of Ontario, Canada. In 1970, the city had a population of just under 110,000. It was home to an unidentified family who we'll call the Wilsons for the sake of simplicity. Jordan and Jessica Wilson and their two sons, 11-year-old Liam and 8-year-old Nolan, lived in an apartment building above a cleaning store in downtown St. Catharines. The family had lived there for years and they never had any problems. But then, in January 1970, they noticed that furniture seemed to move on its own and paintings and photographs would fall off the walls. At first, they assumed that there was something wrong with the structure of the building. Engineers with the city came and checked out the building, but found nothing wrong with it. The family then brought in the gas company because they thought something might be wrong with the furnace. Then the fire department inspected the building. Their visit was followed by an inspection by the Public Utilities Commission. No one found anything wrong with the building. One day, a police officer was in the building because there was a domestic dispute in another apartment. Jessica asked the officer to come into the apartment. Inside the apartment, the officer witnessed some objects moving around by themselves. More police officers were assigned to observe the apartment. One officer noted a footstool flipped over by itself. Another time, a chair slid across the floor of a bedroom to the bed of the youngest Wilson, Nolan. One time, an officer was sitting in a chair and a force tipped it over, knocking him to the floor. An officer watched as a bed levitated 6 inches off the floor. There was a photo of Jordan, Jessica, and Nolan, and apparently the people in the photograph started moving. In total, 5 police officers were assigned to observe the strange occurrences at the Wilson home. 4 of the officers submitted official reports stating they experienced unexplained phenomenon. The 5th officer refused to submit his report because he didn't think anyone would believe what he saw. The 5 police officers were not the only people to witness the strange phenomenon. Several friends of the Wilsons, along with 2 priests, 2 doctors, and a pair of lawyers, also saw strange things happen. On the evening of February 4th, 1970, a priest was in the apartment and he saw a bed move away from a wall. The priest pushed the bed back and it moved again. 2 evenings later, a police officer was in the kitchen examining a cabinet that had tipped over. He then started walking towards the living room. As he did, he heard footsteps head towards him and then go past him into the kitchen. The officer followed the sounds of the footsteps into the kitchen and he saw a chair had been moved into the middle of the room. The next night, the same officer was outside the apartment. A woman who was visiting the Wilson family came out and found the officer. She told the officer to come into one of the bedrooms because one end of a heavy bed had levitated off the ground. The officer went into the bedroom and saw that one end of the bed was several feet off the ground and 2 chairs were holding it up. Then suddenly a photograph that was on the wall flew off and crashed onto the ground. The officer said that it looked like someone had taken the photograph off the wall and thrown it. The next night, a friend was visiting the Wilson family and she saw a rocking chair move across the room. Then she heard a loud bang in the bedroom the boys shared. She went in and discovered that a doll had flown off a shelf on the wall and laid on the floor close to Liam's bed. 2 officers came over that night. A couple who were friends with the Wilsons were also there. They were all sitting in the living room, and one of the officers was sitting in a spot where he could see into the boys' bedroom. He watched as a framed picture fell on Liam's head. This was seemingly the start of a chain of strange phenomenon. A lamp in the bedroom toppled over, a large chest of drawers moved and then moved back. A chair flew up and crashed back down to the floor. On a dressing table, all the objects started moving in one direction except for an alarm clock. The alarm clock flew off in the opposite direction. A bookcase toppled. Jordan Wilson was sitting on a chair. Several people saw it levitate and then crash back down. On February 10th, an officer witnessed Liam Wilson being thrown off a chair. This was not the first time Liam flew off the chair. That had happened about a dozen times in 2 weeks. The next day, a chair Liam was sitting on rose up 6 inches off the floor and then slammed back down. 2 detectives, 2 doctors, and a lawyer all witnessed this, and they couldn't explain how it happened. All the strange happenings put a tremendous amount of stress on the family. They decided to go on vacation to Montreal, Quebec. While in Montreal, nothing unusual happened. When they returned home, the strange occurrences seemed to have come to an end. Those who witnessed the supposed paranormal activity said that it often happened when Liam, the eldest of the Wilson boys, was around. So many people thought he was somehow perpetrating the occurrences. Perhaps he was doing it as a hoax. The officers, who were trained investigators, were also suspicious of this. But they watched him closely, and they knew he wasn't doing anything to cause the occurrences. Also, some things, like knocking over a chair with a police officer in it, would have been physically impossible for an 11-year-old the size of Liam to do. The police talked to Liam's teacher and principal, and they said he was well behaved and never caused any problems. They also said nothing strange happened while Liam was at school. Some people, including the police who witnessed the strange activity, believe a poltergeist haunted Liam. No one has adequately been able to explain what happened in the family's home. One thing that can be excluded is that the family faked it for publicity or to get attention. Their names have never been made public, and they have gone to great lengths to keep their identities secret. 10 years after the strange activities, Liam Wilson talked to writer Michael Clarkson. Liam said that he and his family just wanted to live a normal life. Even a decade after the strange phenomenon, he hoped that no one would identify them because he didn't want it to cause any problems with his life. Several people have tracked down Liam, and when they did, he lied and said he wasn't the person they were looking for. When Clarkson asked Liam if it was all an elaborate hoax, he denied it. He said, why would he lie? The building where the Wilson family lived is still standing. For many years, it was a pizzeria with 6 residential units. The building went up for sale in August 2020. It's unclear what the building is now. If you happen to know what's in the building at 237 Church Street in St. Catharines, Ontario, we'd love to know. Please share that info in the comment section below. Number 2. The Entity. In the early 1970s, Doris Blyther lived in a rundown house in Culver City, which is a Los Angeles suburb. She was a single mother with 4 children. Doris had lived a rough life. She had suffered abuse from her parents, and she was kicked out when she was a teen. She was mentally unwell and took drugs for her psychiatric problems. She had abused alcohol throughout her life. In 1974, Doris was in a bookstore on the UCLA campus. She heard a lecture that was being given by Dr. Barry Taff and his research assistant, Carrie Gaynor. Taff and Gaynor both worked in the parapsychology department at UCLA. After the lecture, Doris approached them and told them that her house was haunted. In fact, she had even been raped by the poltergeist several times. She claimed that 3 entities entered her room. 2 would hold her down, and the 3rd one sexually assaulted her. Taff and Gaynor went to Doris's home, which had been condemned by the city. It was immediately clear that the family lived in squalor. The researchers looked around and noticed strange odors and cold spots, which are signs of a haunting. They interviewed Doris, and she showed them bruises she had from when the entities attacked her. She told them that she heard banging on the walls and the lights would flicker. She said that the fuse box had been pulled out of the wall and it was thrown at her by an unseen entity. Taff and Gaynor also talked to Doris's children. They also experienced strange phenomenon. They said they were slapped, bitten, and scratched by an unseen entity. One of her sons saw his mother being thrown around the room, and he tried to intervene. His arm was nearly broken when he tried to save her. While Taff and Gaynor were in the home, they saw a closet door open by itself, and a frying pan flew across the room. Taff and Gaynor thought that they saw and heard enough to set up an investigation at the Blyther house. Over 10 weeks, 30 investigators visited the family's home. They took many photographs and had them developed. In some of the photos, there were white trails that were left by white orbs. One of the most famous photos is this one, with a white arc over Doris. In another incident, researchers witnessed a green mist form into the shape of a male torso and coil itself around Doris. While there was a camera recording the incident, the green mist wasn't visible on the film. Doris said that there was one main humanoid spirit, which she called the Entity. Shortly after the investigation wrapped up, the Blyther family moved out of state and settled in Texas. In 1978, a fictionalized account of the alleged haunting was published as a novel entitled The Entity. In 1981, it was made into a film of the same name. After Doris Blyther moved away, she stayed out of the media spotlight. She eventually even lost contact with her children. She supposedly remarried and changed her name. According to Barry Tapp's website, Doris died in 1999 at the age of 58. In a 2011 posting on Tapp's website, he wrote that he did not think that Doris had been raped by the ghost. He said that there's no evidence that she ever had sex with a ghost. He said that there was simply not enough evidence to support that. But he does think that she was haunted by a terrifying poltergeist. Number 1. The San Pedro Poltergeist. In the winter of 1988, 23-year-old Jackie Hernandez was going through a rough part in her marriage. At the time, she had a 2-year-old son, Jamie, and she was pregnant with her second child. She decided to move with Jamie into a bungalow in San Pedro, which is a community in South Los Angeles. At first, she really enjoyed the house. But after about a month there, she noticed some strange things happening. For example, it sounded like someone was in the walls, and they were dropping pebbles that would roll down from the top to the bottom of the walls. Then, every night, she started to hear a loud pitched noise. One night, she decided to find the source of the noise. She noticed that it was coming from somewhere in the attic. That's when she noticed the door to the attic was open. She thought that this was odd because she knew she didn't open it herself. She was too scared to ever go into the attic herself. A babysitter, Christina Jakovic, also experienced the strange phenomenon. She said that one time while she was babysitting, she heard strange sounds coming from Jamie's room. She walked towards his room, and just as she got there, the door opened by itself. Christina went into the room and closed the door behind her. Then, when she went to leave, the door opened again by itself. One day, Jackie and Christina were doing some chores in Jackie's kitchen. They saw some strange glowing orbs. Jackie managed to snap a photo of the orbs. Then, the camera stopped working. Christina thought if they didn't point the camera at the orbs, the camera might start working again. So she pointed the camera out the window. When she looked through the viewfinder, she was shocked to see a decrepit old man. The incident spooked Christina, and she fled the house. Other people noticed strange and sometimes violent things happening in the house. For example, Jackie had a daybed and would often collapse while someone was on it. Another time, her son Jamie was thrown against a wall. On a different occasion, pencils flew out of their holder. In April 1989, Jackie gave birth to a daughter, Samantha. Unfortunately, the presence of an infant didn't do anything to diminish the strange happenings. One time, Jackie got up in the middle of the night and she saw an old man sitting on her son's bunk bed. She looked away, and then when she looked at the bed again, the man was gone. Jackie also started to have terrible nightmares. For example, she had dreams that she was attacked with a lead pipe and then she was thrown into the San Pedro harbor where she drowned. But in her dreams, it didn't look like modern times. Instead, she thought it looked like the 1930s. Eventually, Jackie determined that there were two spirits in her home. One was benign, but the other was wrathful. In August 1989, Jackie said she was doing the dishes, and suddenly, the water changed to a blood-like ooze. She said that the ooze started coming out of the walls. Jackie finally decided to call paranormal investigator Barry Taft, who we talked about in our previous entry. On August 8, 1989, Barry and his team went to Jackie's home, armed with cameras, infrared detectors, and other equipment. They first sat Jackie down for an interview in front of a camera. But they had a problem because the light stopped working. Then they heard loud footsteps in the attic. One of the photographers, Jeff Wheatcraft, went into the attic with a 35mm camera. Jackie's husband, Al Hernandez, was there that night. Al did not believe that the house was haunted, but he thought it would be a good idea if the paranormal investigators came because he thought it would prove to Jackie that the house wasn't haunted. While Jeff Wheatcraft was in the attic, Al was in the bedroom with the kids. Then, Al very distinctly heard someone whisper in his ear, "Tell them to get the hell out of here." Seconds later, he heard a scream in the attic. Wheatcraft bolted out of the attic. He claimed that something had grabbed his camera. The camera was expensive, and Wheatcraft needed it, so he decided to go back into the attic. A teammate with a video camera followed him, but the video camera stopped working in the attic. Wheatcraft found the camera's body in a crate, and the lens was behind the attic's trapdoor. Once he found the camera, he and his teammate immediately got out of the attic. Once everyone was on the main floor, they heard footsteps in the attic again. The team told Jackie that they were going to leave and review the material. They promised they would contact her soon. That night, Jackie and the kids slept in the living room. Jackie could hear something in the children's room. Then a beach ball flew out of the room as if someone had thrown it. As Jackie was lying on the couch, she felt an unseen force hold her down and try to suffocate her. She was sure she was going to die. But then suddenly, it let her go and she caught her breath. This was Jackie's breaking point, and she decided to confront whatever was in the attic. It was her first time in the attic. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the grizzled old man appeared in front of her. It startled her so much that she fell through the door of the attic. Luckily, she wasn't too badly injured. She got her and her kids out of the house. Using the cordless phone, she called the paranormal investigators again. They immediately went back to her home. This time, Jeff Wheatcraft and another man went into the attic. Everyone on the main floor heard what sounded like someone snapping their fingers 3 times. Then everyone on the main floor felt an overwhelming amount of anxiety. They told Wheatcraft and the other man to get out of the attic immediately. Wheatcraft and the second man looked down through the trapdoor. Then suddenly Wheatcraft was pulled back by a mysterious force. The other man went looking for him. He only had one light source, and that was the flash on his camera. He snapped this photo of Wheatcraft and saw that some rope had been tied around his neck. The second man got Wheatcraft down, and they got out of the attic. Wheatcraft was dazed, and he didn't remember what had just happened. Jackie, her kids, and the paranormal research team fled the house. Jackie never spent another night in the house. She had lived there for about 3 years. Jackie's story was featured on the television show Paranormal Witness. Jackie said she got out because she was terrified. She said she was convinced she would eventually be killed or she would find her children dead. Jackie and Al decided to give their marriage another shot, and they moved to Walden, California, which is about 180 miles from San Pedro. But after a few months, they realized that the marriage wasn't meant to be, and Al left. Shortly after he left, the paranormal activity began again. Barry Taft said it's unusual for a poltergeist to follow someone, but that appears to be the case with Jackie Hernandez. Jackie said that one day she and 2 neighbors moved a TV set into a shed. They all saw the image of a gnarled old man on the screen. Jackie said it was the same man she had seen in her former home. That night she heard what sounded like someone or something banging on the inside of the shed like it wanted to get out. She once again called Barry Taft and his team. They came to her new home, but none of their equipment worked. So they decided to use a Ouija board to see if they could get any answers as to what was happening. They started by asking the poltergeist how long he had been stuck in the spirit world. He responded 60 years. They asked if he had died in the home in San Pedro, and he said he didn't. He said that he died in San Pedro Bay after someone held him underwater. He never lived in the San Pedro house, but he said his killer did. Jackie was sure the dream she experienced was the man's death. The spirit said that he was born in 1912 and he died in 1930. Sometime later, Jackie and her friends came across a newspaper article. In March 1930, a seaman named Herman Hendrickson was found dead in San Pedro Harbor. When he was found, there was a jagged wound on his head. The authorities thought that his death was an accident, and he sustained the injury on his head when he fell off the dock. One problem was that the poltergeist said he was 18 when he died, and Herman Hendrickson was 28 when he died. Nevertheless, Jackie was sure that his ghost was haunting her. Jackie stayed in Walden until 1990, and then she moved back to Los Angeles. Jackie learned that the man who built the house where she initially encountered the poltergeist was named John Damon. She was sure that this was the ghost of the old man she would see. One day in the spring of 1990, she was in San Pedro, and she was by the home where she used to live. Suddenly, she saw a small ball of light. She followed the light, and it led her to a cemetery. It then went to a gravesite. It was the gravesite of John Damon. The light circled the tombstone a few times, and then just disappeared. After that, she never saw the spirit of the old man ever again. The other poltergeists also started to leave her alone, and eventually, all the paranormal activity stopped. According to the television show Paranormal Witness, the house in San Pedro was rented out to other people. However, these new renters rarely stay longer than a few months. The house in San Pedro is still there today. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.